Hi everyone, and welcome to the Book Refuge, and welcome to my book review and spoilers for the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. Wow, this book was a ride. I have a lot to say about it. I'm really excited. This review, I'm sure as you can see, is pretty long, and if you see me looking down here, I actually have 2 pages of notes because it was very difficult to boil this down into non-spoilery parts to explain. So I actually had a little help. I found some other people's videos to refer to, which I will link down below. And that includes one of N.K. Jemisin giving her own explanation, which I definitely borrowed for the beginning of this, as well as Daniel Green's review and spoilers, which is the first review I ever saw for this book. Those 2 videos will be linked down below in case you want to hear someone who will maybe be a little more eloquent than me, because this is gonna be interesting. Like, I'm really excited and also equally hesitant because, wow. First off, this book is in Own Voices. N.K. Jemisin, this is her, is this beautiful, beautiful woman. And most of the characters in this story are also African American or dark skin, because I don't think there's an America here, so we can't call it that. And I absolutely love that. It's so unique in that respect. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive in case you haven't heard of this. The first, most of this will be non-spoilers. I'm just going to go over a basic synopsis, which is going to be really basic because, like I said, there's lots of parts to this story. I'm going to go over basically like where we start off, and then I have some negatives and positives, and then I will completely warn you when we're going to get into spoilers. So yeah, if you're like me, maybe you're kind of hesitant to pick up this book because I'd heard mixed reviews about people being able to read it because of something going on in here, which I'll get into in a minute. But I'm so glad that this was a pick for Murphy's book club. Her and I had both the same feeling that we didn't think we would like this book, and man, am I glad that I went for it because it was a ride. So a basic non-spoilery synopsis of this is a secondary world. It's kind of all set on this like Pangea typed continent, there's just like one piece of land basically on Earth at this point. So you think back to like what Pangea would have been like. Everything's kind of in this one place. It is like fantasy, science fiction, science fantasy. It's a weird mixture of just all the genres. The people in this world have discovered many different ways of surviving these extinction level events that are happening constantly, including some people who've evolved into what is called an orogene, or the derogative term of them is called a roga, and they can manipulate seismic activity. They can cause different natural, like earth things to happen or suppress them. And that is kind of their role within this society, as they are used to control and contain these events to keep it from destroying the world. And there are 3 women in this story who have that ability, and they're all different ages. The first one is Damaya, who is a child who it is just being discovered by these people called the Guardians in this world, and they're the people who train, control, advise the orogenes. So they're always looking for new ones. They try to find them when they're really young, because if they find them once they've gone through puberty or too late in life, they can't control them anymore, and then they can't use them, and they usually end up having to them because they can't be powerful. The Guardians are also mostly immune to their powers, and they can like suppress them when they're around them. But anyway, Damaya is just being discovered, and so this guardian named Shafa has found her and is going to bring her back to the school where they train them all, and he's going to be her guardian. So we're meeting her when that's just starting to happen to her. Next, we have Cyanite, who is about my age. As far as I can tell, she's like mid to late 20s. still really young, and she is at kind of the starting point of her career as an orogene and is being sent on different missions. And so we meet her just as she is being sent on a mission with a new mentor who is much more powerful than her, one of the most powerful orogenes that they have. And they're getting sent on this mission by the Fulcrum, which is the place that like controls them, to go do some work for this one community that is having some natural disaster issues. So they basically get hired out. They are tools for the Fulcrum. They have to do whatever they say or be, you know, killed, basically, kind of thing. And then third, we have Isun, who is a middle-aged woman who is hunting for her daughter. And now I'll get into why. This is all still non-spoilers, because it's all like each thing I'm explaining about these women is what happens like when we first meet them. And I feel that it's helpful to just kind of tell this little bit about them, because the back cover doesn't give you anything. And I read the back cover of this book probably 6 times, and it didn't seem interesting to me because I like to know more about characters. But anyway, so I just have a little bit more for the synopsis. So the story begins with Isun sitting next to the dead body of her 2-year-old, and I think you say his name Yuchi, it's Uche, who has been bludgeoned to death by her husband, Jiha, who, when the baby, Uchi, made it accidentally known that he was an orogene, or a roga is what they use as like, kind of like the derogatory term of them, the father beat him to death because they fear these children and they don't want the Fulcrum to get more of them, to be able to use them for things. And then he fled their town with their older daughter, Nesun, who I think is about like 8 years old. I could be wrong. Feel free to correct me if you know what I mean. So the same time that all this is going down, the Earth is about to enter its next 5th season, which this is considered the next extinction level event. It means that the world gets too unstable, it becomes uninhabitable, and most all of life will die out when this happens. Seasons can last for centuries. It can be a really dark time. And when a 5th season comes around, everything kind of explodes, implodes, and everybody goes crazy. And it's an inevitable down spiral into an apocalypse is what it is. So the same time this happens to Isun, she loses her son. Her daughter goes missing. All these things are happening. She takes off to find her daughter, and we follow her through that journey. So yeah, so that's kind of the basic setup for these 3 women that we meet. And now I'm going to get into some negatives and positives. And again, these are kept pretty non-spoiler. I'm just going to give you some things I liked and didn't like before getting into the spoilers. So I'm going to start with the negatives so we can end with the positives, because I don't have very many negatives for this story, okay? First negative, the world. The world was very dark, and for me, there was a few things in this world that were just so harsh and so painful, and this really includes the biggest trigger warning for the entire book is violence against children. There are at least 4 different situations where there is extreme violence against children, and it was very hard to stomach for me. And actually, Murphy, who I read this with, it's why she's taking a break from the second one, is because some of the things in there as a mom just like hurt her too much. Now, I'm not a mom, but I have young nieces and nephews who I adore, and it was a lot for me too. And the way that it's explained is just so like matter of fact, because this is the kind of world that they live in. And I will say too, there is a purpose behind each situation. Like, it isn't just reckless abuse. It's definitely unwarranted. Oop. Police cars going by. However, there was no one of these events that I felt that the author was putting in for no reason. Like, there was purpose behind each situation. It was just it was a heartbreaking purpose. It gutted me, this purpose, but I never felt that it was like gratuitous just to put it in there just because. But yeah, that's a negative if that is going to be hard for you. don't do it. In the spoiler section, I will tell you what these things are. But anyway, the second negative is like the magic system and what's happening in this world. So a lot of it evolves around like geology. So there's a lot of things having to do with like rocks and earth and seismic activity and these things called obelisks, which I won't explain because it's totally a spoiler, but there was a lot of like earth things and I don't get it yet. I'm hoping that I will understand that better as I read further, or upon a reread, I would understand it better. But as of now, it was really confusing for me, and it definitely wasn't the world that kept me reading. It was the characters, which I will get into in my positives. But yeah, it was hard. I'm not gonna fib, like it was hard for me, and I feel like I'm a pretty advanced reader, and it was a lot. And then finally for the negatives, which this negative is actually the first positive, and I know that sounds weird, but I'll explain. So this goes into both categories, like I said, and there is one of the perspectives, the perspective of Isun, that is a second person POV. So that means it's told in you experienced this, you are doing this, you notice this. So you are reading the book as you are Isun. And for a lot of people, that perspective is why they struggled with this story so much. They read it in second person point of view and they're like, I can't hack it, I don't like it, and they put the book down. And I did not feel that way, but I want to put it in a negative and a positive because I think for some of you, that's going to be hard. The other two perspectives are not in second person, they're just in a regular like third person point of view. But Isun's is. And so you are reading those chapters as a 42-year-old woman who's just experienced the death of her son, who's trying to find her daughter and keeps running into all these situations. And I loved it. It felt like a choose your own adventure, even though it was like already picked for me. And so everything that happened, I was trying to process it like it was happening to me. And I had a great time with that. A lot of other people didn't. People complained. They put the book down because of it. I'm sorry, I loved it, and I think if you give it a chance and look at it as you are the character who's living it, that it could be a really fun time for you. So, yeah, and also, again, non-spoiler, there is a purpose for the you point of view. And it was very, very fun to figure out why. I was reading this in the Patreon group and I came across a certain part of the book where I figured this thing out, and I messaged all my friends in the Discord and like they all started noticing it too. And so that was really fun because I was totally right about why, and it was such a fun adventure because the author doesn't hide this thing from you. She drops the clues very purposely but subtly, and if you pick them up, you will figure out what's happened, and it makes the end so satisfying when that thing is confirmed and you know that the author earned it because they didn't just trick you. All the signs are there. When you put the puzzle pieces together, it makes sense, and it was so satisfying. Like that part of the book was very satisfying to me. So please give this a chance, whether that's listening to it on audio or just, just suffer through it for at least 100 pages and see where you're at with it by then, because wow. All right, so now on to more positives. Like I said before, the characters. I loved how flawed and struggling and overconfident and like broken some of these characters were. In this world, the Orogene, they are feared and often killed young for their powers. So because of this, they're not treated as humans. They're treated as tools for the fulcrum to get their dirty work done, to keep people safe, to be forced into it, basically. They are slaves to the fulcrum. And we get introduced to some characters who have very interesting perspectives on that. Some characters are just resigned that this is their life and they want to do the best that they can with this life. And other people think that they could do better and that they want to change that. And that was really exciting for me. So the way that these three women deal with this knowledge is so interesting because it's very different for each of them. And I really enjoyed getting to see how they react to being used this way and what steps they take to either better their lives or be resigned to it or whatever. And I loved it. The next positive, there was a lot of detail and scale to the story. Like, even though I was very confused, like I said, I felt that everything, like, the author didn't waste any words. This is only a 400-page book, but it felt so full of information that it also went like kind of slowly. You know, I couldn't skim anything. Like, if I would find myself, you know, sometimes you get lazy and you like skip a page. I couldn't do that because you were missing things, and the author was laying down clues, and you just had to pay attention if you wanted to get the most out of it that you could. And I also feel like because of the second person point of view, you got a chance to see a lot of details, and I just felt like the character Isun that I was living through, I got to see so much about her life in such a little amount of time. Like, it was amazing. I really love that. Also, this book is super diverse, like I said, and there was also almost the whole cast is dark-skinned. There is a polyamorous relationship in here that is just is. There's no like big explanation for it or trying to rationalize. Like, they're just in a situation where this happens. And I really appreciated that. I really appreciated that it was just there and no one was shoving it down my throat, but it's like, hey, this is part of this story. That's cool. There was also a trans character who, it's a spoiler to say who it is, but it was really cool when I figured that out. And again, it's just like, okay, who cares? You're trans, you're human, whatever. We have bigger issues. Nobody was like freaked out by it. It was just kind of like a puzzle because that person used to be someone else, and then when we meet them again, they're someone else. And so that was really cool because when you figure it out, you're like, that's why we knew you, but we didn't know you. So that was really exciting. It's a very interesting way that I saw a trans person put into a story. I really liked it. I did. And then my final positive, and then we'll get into a few spoilers. I'm already, you know, the clock is ticking away on me here. This was a nonstop ride for me. Even when there weren't external forces pushing on them, like maybe like the plot slowed down for a little bit, the internal struggle and the things going on inside of these women and the bigger plot as a whole, and that ticking clock of where is Isun's daughter? Like, we're wasting time. Like, has her father figured out that she also is an orogene? Like, has he killed her? Like, we don't know what's going on. And so there's always that ticking clock going of like, oh, we got stuck in this place. Well, that means they're getting even further ahead of us. And so just these situations put like a lot of stress on it. So for me, it always felt like it was moving very quickly, and I really enjoyed that. So if you haven't figured it out, I gave this book 5 stars. I had a wonderful time reading it. It's going on my favorite list of the year. I heard from Beautifully Bookish Bethany that 2 and 3 are just as much of a ride and just as exciting. I'm so happy. I've only read the first chapter of the second book, but after I finish The Shadow Rising, I'm definitely going to dig into that one soon. So now I'm going to put up the warning here. There will be spoilers coming ahead. There's just a couple points I want to touch on, like the kind of violence we're dealing with, and then a few things I want to gush about with people who've read the book. So if you have to leave now, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out, and I'll see you next time. All right, let's get into spoilers. Let's start with the first one. So if you're still here, you know, it's happening. All 3 women are the same person, and oh my word, what a clever writer. N.K. Jemisin she's brilliant. She is brilliant. I didn't have any clue right away, although there's a couple things. Like, there's the fact that the 5th season that like Isun is living in as a 42-year-old isn't really mentioned when we're talking about the other 2 women. And that is such a big event because everybody knows that it's happening. And so for it not to be mentioned in the other 2 perspectives was just odd, because we know they couldn't have been really in another part of the world because there's only this, you know, one piece of land basically, and it's only so big. And then the author started dropping hints within the other POVs. So the first one, I actually wrote it down. I even think I have it memorized. I think it's on page 283 of my paperback. And when we were in the point of view of Cyanite, the 26-year-old, she slips in to the second person point of view. It's a third person point of view, and then all of a sudden it slips into a you. She says you when talking about herself instead of it being third person point of view. And that was awesome because I freaked out. I messaged Murphy and I was like, Murphy, what do you think? I think they're all the same person, because if you think that Cyanite is Isan, then you would think that Demaya is Cyanite, and it was crazy. And then the next thing that gets known is Demaya, she was like just a low level, I can't remember what it's called right now, but she just had been training and she was about to take her first test to get her first level. Like they count their levels by how many rings that they wear. And so when you enter the first level, you choose a new name. That's a big theme in the story too, is whenever, you know, something changes you, you change your name. And so the last chapter we get from Demaya, she changes her name to Cyanite. And just, I was so happy because I was like, oh my God, I'm totally right. But then the next thing that has you worried, and this is something that was hard because I had a feeling something bad would happen. Isan has these 2 kids, right? The youngest one who was murdered is 2, and her oldest daughter is 8, which means she would have had that first child at like 36 years old. Well, Cyanite has a son named Corundum, I think that's how you say his name. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And she has him when she's like 27. And I knew something happened to that son. Like I knew that was a thing because I was like, she doesn't mention another child at all. However, Isan, like at one point she said, she's talking about her pregnancies and she talks about the 2 she had, but then she's like, there's that one that doesn't count. And the first time you hear that, you maybe think, oh, well, maybe she had a miscarriage or something happened, whatever. But it becomes really clear that she's tried to forget about this other child that she had. So I had a bad feeling. So, and that's the thing again. So now anyway, so that's a great part of the story, by the way. Finding out that they're all the same person. So exciting. And I'm really intrigued to see what the next book is then, because both Demaya and Cyanite kind of got wrapped up. There's still this time between Cyanite and Isan that we don't know how she met this man she married, when she ended up with these kids. She's, you know, not really using her powers anymore. She's tried to kind of suppress them or whatever. So I think there's still room to talk about that in the next one for sure. So let's see, what else do I want to say? No, I think that's good. So now we get into kind of some of the things that were the really violent things. So I'm going to tell you what those triggering events were, you know, for some reason, if you're a non-spoiler person who wants to know those things. Obviously, there's the death of her child, Uchi, at the beginning, which we come in on. That's the first thing we're knowing about her, and it's just... Then there's the situation with the node. So her Cyanite's mentor, Alabaster, who she's also being paired with because she's a 4th ringer and he's a 10 ringer. So he's her mentor, and they're supposed to have babies together because she also fits into the breeder class where their 2 sets of genes should make babies. And Alabaster is really sick of this because he's had 8 other kids with other people, and they don't get to keep their children. They just have one and pass it along to be raised. And if it has their same powers, it will enter the academy like she did. And if it's a still, which is, you know, like a squib basically in Harry Potter speak, it will be given to a family to be adopted and taken care of. So you don't keep your children. But Alabaster takes her to this place called the Node Station, where there is supposed to be an orogene. It's on a fault line or a place where there's a lot of seismic activity, and their job is to constantly control that so it doesn't get out of hand and cause problems. Well, while they're traveling, Alabaster senses that something is wrong, and when they go there, he shows her what a node is. And it is an orogene, but it is a child who has had a procedure done where they're basically a vegetable, and this node, they're all strapped up, naked, all these tubes coming from it, and this child is being used to control it, but they don't have any free will. They're not even home anymore. They're a vegetable, and their power is just being used against their will. And we find out that that's what happens to children who they are too past the point of being controlled by a guardian, where Demaya, she was young enough to be taught. There's this child who's strapped up to all these things, and Alabaster shows her this is what happens at a node. That was very hard to read. It was very disturbing because they have to put this child down at the end. Also, there's abuse against Demaya. She has her hand broken to teach her control. That's another one of the hints, actually, because like Cyanide is remembering the pain in her hand when her mentor Shafa breaks her hand and tells her that if she can't keep control, he'll murder her, because an orogene who can't keep control is useless to them. So very dark situations, guys, very dark. And then the final thing that is the most painful, I have a lot of other notes to talk about, but I mean, they all kind of like fall into this ending for me. So there's a point of time in Cyanide's life where her and Alabaster, they kind of escape. Like, they're thought to be dead after that a big explosion happens in the place where they were sent to work. And through some magical something, which I don't consider it, it wasn't an easy thing. Like, there's an explanation for it. I'm just bad at giving it. They end up on this island in the middle of the ocean, and everyone thinks they're dead. And so everyone thinks they're dead. And there are these pirates there, and there is one very attractive man who, that's the polyamorous relationship, is both Alabaster and Isun like this man. But anyway, that's not important. But her and Alabaster have a son together named Karudnam. And again, this is where I was like, something bad is going to happen to this kid. And so they're able to live in peace for a few years. But after, through some circumstances, the Guardians find out about this island and they come and attack it. And Alabaster gets captured, and Enon, their mutual husband mate, he gets killed. And Shafa, her old guardian, is here to take her son away. And it is one of the creepiest, most uncomfortable scenes of my life, that he just thinks he owns their child. And it's very hard, and I understand how I cried so hard. And all that Cyanide can think about is that child hooked up to the node, and that she would rather her son die than have to have that happen. And so she murders her son to save him from this life. And it's hard, guys. It is hard to read. And I knew it was coming. I didn't know it would be that way. Thought it was going to be an accident. But yeah, that happens. So that's the last we see of Cyanide. And so now we know what made Isun this way. And yeah, so it was intense, guys. So I said the dark things there. I've told you the things that were really hard to read. But this was such a powerful, powerful story. I'm very excited to learn more about it. There's so many things I didn't even touch on. Those are the things I needed to gush about the most, that I needed to like get out there. But I would love to talk more. If there are parts of the novel that you want to talk about, definitely hit me up. If it's a spoiler, just, hit enter a few times so that people don't accidentally come across it. I would love to talk more about things. So yeah, this book was amazing. I hope to continue very soon and find out what this is all about. But I really, really love it. It's so good. So this is 5 stars. so great. Thank you so much for joining me for this review. I know I don't do a ton of reviews, but when a book touches me this way and makes me think this way, I really have to do it. So I make new videos every Monday and Thursday and sometimes other days. And you can watch some more of those videos right now.